Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are looking at a truly fascinating piece of history where statecraft, warfare, and culture just violently collided. We're going to see how a 17th century Javanese king took the very concept of time itself, literally time, and used it as a masterful tool for political unity.
Okay, let's dive right into this. How exactly do you unite an empire that is torn between two totally different eras of time? Because this was the massive existential problem facing the Mataram Sultanate in central Java. You've got this sprawling empire, right? It's incredibly diverse, but it's demographically split right down the middle. On the one hand, you have traditional Hindu Javanese subjects, and they're operating on one timeline. And on the other hand, a growing population of Muslim subjects operating on a completely different timeline. And look, a fractured society, it just cannot stand against external threats. This demographic divide was huge, and it required a flat-out genius solution.
And well, the ultimate genius solution to that divide was the calendar Jawa. It was this highly inventive hybrid calendar enacted in 1633. But, to fully grasp this cultural masterstroke, to really understand why the ruler of Mataram had to fundamentally manipulate time itself, we actually need to take a step back first. We need to look at the relentless military conquests that made this kind of unification so absolutely necessary. Section 1. Forging the Mataram Empire, the unification of Java. Let's look at the explosive rise of the man who would actually build this empire, because his rapid, aggressive evolution as a young conqueror is just wild. So he was born Raden Mas Rongsung, raised in the royal court, and fully educated in martial arts, statecraft, theology, the whole shebang. But his path to power? Completely unexpected. In 1613, his father dies suddenly. His elder half-brother, Martapura, gets placed on the throne. But due to severe infirmities, he rules for literally a single day. One day. Court nobles immediately step in, depose him, and at just 20 years old, Raden Mas Rongsung takes the throne. He assumes the title that would eventually become Sultan Agung. And man, he wasted absolutely zero time. By 1619 and 1624, he was neutralizing alliances in the eastern principalities, launching an amphibious invasion of Madura. He was just completely driven to unite the entire island of Java under Mataram's authority. The culmination of this incredibly rapid expansion was the 1625 siege of Surabaya. Now, Surabaya was Mataram's formidable, heavily fortified rival. But Sultan Agung, he doesn't just waste his men on some direct assault. No, this plays out more like an intense strategic thriller. First, he blockades the city. Then, he literally dams the Brantes River. And most ruthlessly, this is intense, he poisons the city's water supply with dead animals. It's brutal. After a grueling 5-year siege, Surabaya finally surrenders, entirely due to famine and disease. And these brutal but highly effective tactics, they left Sultan Agung as the undisputed ruler of almost all of Java. Section 2. Halting the Dutch threat. Clashing with the VOC. Now, what's really interesting about this comparison is the sheer scale of the conflict. With Java mostly consolidated, a new heavily armed shadow fell over the island, the Dutch East India Company, or VOC, stationed in Batavia. Sultan Agung rightfully saw the Dutch as an existential threat to Javanese sovereignty, so when they refused to submit to him, he launched 2 massive sieges. In 1628, it was all about brute force. We're talking nearly 59,000 soldiers attempting a direct infantry assault, but that failed heavily due to Dutch naval bombardment and cannon fire. So in 1629, Sultan Agung pivots. He brings a smaller, much more heavily armed force of about 14,000 to 20,000 troops, and he tries to use those exact same starvation tactics that worked so well in Surabaya. But the VOC was ready for it. They actually used their naval dominance to locate and burn Mataram's secret coastal rice granaries before the troops even arrived, and that forced the Javanese armies to retreat because of starvation. However, even though both of those sieges ultimately failed to breach the fort, they were incredibly costly for the Dutch. Remember those biological warfare tactics from Surabaya? Sultan Agung repurposed them, successfully polluting Batavia's water supply, and this directly led to a massive outbreak of cholera and dysentery. It was an outbreak so severe that it actually claimed the life of the top VOC leader, Governor General Jan Pieter Zoon Koen, right inside the walls of his own fort. Section 3. The Javanese calendar reform, synthesizing time. Following these massive battles, Sultan Agung realized a really critical truth. True unification required cultural harmony, not just military force. He looked out at his empire and saw 2 distinctly different ways of measuring reality itself. And this brilliantly illustrates the divide.
His traditional subjects were using the solar-based Hindu Saka calendar. This was absolutely essential for their agricultural cycles, and it had been going ever since 78 AD. Meanwhile, his Muslim subjects followed the lunar-based Islamic Hijri calendar, which was essential for their religious observances. Because solar and lunar years are fundamentally different lengths, these competing methods meant his people weren't farming, trading, or worshipping on the same timeline. They were completely out of sync.
So, Sultan Agung basically transitions from the battlefield to the administrative table, and he executes this brilliant three-step compromise. Step 1. He appeases the traditionalists by retaining that ongoing centuries-old Saka-era numbering. Step 2. To appease his Muslim subjects, he drops the solar year and adopts the lunar length of the Islamic year. Step 3. He fuses them together. Literally, by keeping the old year number but moving it forward at a brand new lunar pace, he created the unified calendar Jawa.
So, the crucial point is the year 1633. In his new hybrid system, 1633 instantly became Saka year 1555. It's just amazing to think about. By forcing his entire empire onto the exact same timeline, basically overnight, he forged a shared reality. It was a blueprint for cultural unity so effective that this exact calendar is still used in Javanese royal rituals today. Talk about a real game changer. Section 4. An enduring cultural legacy, beyond military might. Sultan Agung's final years really prove that his mastery of statecraft outshone even his largest military campaigns. Just look at what he accomplished. To solidify his religious authority in 1641, he actually sent an emissary all the way to Mecca and was granted the official papal title Sultan Abdul Fattah Agung. So he wasn't just a king anymore, he was the great sultan. But he was also a deep intellectual. He authored the Sirat Sastra Ginding, which is a philosophical treatise detailing exactly how to harmonize Islamic theology with traditional Javanese cultural life and music. And architecturally, he commissioned the monumental Imogiri royal graveyard in 1632. He blended Hindi Javanese and Islamic styles into this massive hilltop complex, and that actually remains the official burial site for monarchs to this very day. Ultimately, Sultan Agung fell gravely ill and passed away in early 1645 at the age of 52. He had ruled for 32 incredibly transformative years. Now, unfortunately, his son, Imogiri I, turned out to be a tyrannical ruler who basically undid a lot of this work. He allied with the VOC, which eventually caused the unified Mataram Empire to collapse and fragment. Yet, despite all that, Sultan Agung's personal legacy survived. In 1975, he was officially named a national hero of Indonesia, and that was recognizing not just his fierce anti-colonial resistance, but that cultural blueprint he left behind, the very core identity of Central Javanese arts, literature, and religious synthesis.
Which brings us to our final thought for today. Think about it. A king who waged some of the largest indigenous military campaigns against a global superpower ultimately secured his legacy not with swords, not with sieges, but with a calendar. It really begs the question, how does manipulating something as fundamental as time shape a nation's modern identity? Sultan Agung synthesized two entirely different worlds into one shared timeline, and in doing so, he created a cultural harmony that long outlasted his military empire. It's just a powerful reminder that sometimes the most effective tool for building a lasting nation isn't found on a battlefield at all, but in the brilliant structuring of everyday life. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I really hope this leaves you eager to uncover even more of the deep roots of cultural history.